this clip I'm going to talk about how to paint a background without getting streaks. There are many styles of background, but in this clip I'm talking about any large flat area of wash painted around a complicated subject. The first tip is to mix a lot more colour than you think you'll need. A large puddle of colour will prevent you running out in the middle of your background and possibly not matching the same colour again. You don't want that to happen, or you'll have a line where one colour started and the other one finished. Also, whilst you're mixing your next colour because you've run out of the first, your edge will dry and you risk a hard edge that you didn't want around your picture. So mix plenty and you won't run out. The second tip is to think about whether you could tip your picture up slightly, just a very little bit, so that there's a gentle slope. This can help acquire a wet edge. I call it a bead, as the paint runs down the page, which is very helpful for working around complicated areas. If you're going to put your painting on a slant, ensure that you're not painting into any sharp grooves that end suddenly in points, because if you do, you'll end up with a trickle of water running down the painting. If you're a very new or a slow painter, choose a paint which doesn't granulate. Granulating paints can settle in the lines and grooves quicker than you can get around to painting the next area. Colours like cobalt blue, French ultramarine, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and those earth colours like the umbers and quite a few of the blues such as manganese and cerulean, they all granulate. And what you'll end up is little lines where it settled into the grooves before you could get round to moving it along. My main tip is to work with a bead of paint. So put your board on a very slight angle, a little tilt, and if you're painting around a very complicated item such as a spray of leaves or a vase of flowers, a wet bead on the edge of your wash will still ensure that you have a nice wet edge to work with. So start in one corner. See the bead that I'm making around on the edges of my shells. Working two sides at once, but keeping a wet edge. As I work round, if I keep that very wet edge, it'll still be usable until I get back to it. See this edge here? It's not creating any hard lines as long as I'm fairly quick, because this is a granulating paint, this one. It's got a lot of raw sienna in it. So I have to keep moving around the three areas that I'm painting. And keep that bead of paint very wet so that I can manipulate it. Now I've got four areas that I have to keep working on. So this one over here needs to be worked on quickly before it starts to settle. Move that down a bit further. And this one. So as you can see, I'm trying to work all sides of my shells simultaneously around this complicated area. If you've got a vase of flowers or something, you don't need to work the whole length of the picture. If you start in one corner, if you're right-handed, start on the left, and if you're left-handed, start on the right, and work towards the other corner, the opposite diagonal corner. That way you'll be keeping the least amount of sides workable at once. Right, don't forget when you get to the very end, you've got that bead of water. That's going to cause cauliflowers if you don't take it off. By cauliflowers I mean back runs, or blooms some people call it. If you've got any little puddles, take those off. It's covered that shell a little bit, so I'm going to fix it up. Take all the puddles off and allow it to dry without going back into it. It's a bad habit to try and fix things up that you perceive as a mistake by going back in, especially with a wet brush. If you go back into your picture with a wet brush, you'll be adding water, moving the pigment around and probably causing a cauliflower. In my case, I would like to add a little bit of various colours, just in a few dots and spots, because this is meant to look like sand. So I want to add a little bit of variation, maybe even a little bit of pink in every now and then. While it's still wet, I can do this. But now, this picture will dry without any streaks at all. It was smoothly applied, keeping a bead on all sides, and it will come up just fine. So here's what happens when you can't get to an edge in time. I've spent my time making maybe more mix, or for whatever reason I haven't gotten to my edge in time. Two things are going to happen. First of all, I'll get hard edges where one edge meets a very dry part of the painting. The second thing that will happen, or possibly could happen, is a back run or bloom. You can see that starting to happen here already. This drier area of the painting is wicking out the water of my newly painted brush strokes, and I'm going to get a back run, cauliflower or bloom some people call them, in this area here. You can see it's pulling up through here as well. So this area was very dry and it's created a hard edge, which I don't want, and this area and this one are both creating back runs. So here's my resulting background on the shells. You can see it's nice and smooth, there's no lines, no problems there. And here's the one where we waited until it was a bit damp and starting to dry. You can see the hard line across here where the background was completely dry, and how it's made blooms and back runs around some of the other areas. So that was what would happen if you didn't keep that nice bead and wet edge to work with.